For over a decade, the world didn't just like Meg Ryan, we needed her. Her smile wasn't just a facial expression, it was a cultural promise. In a changing America, she was the ultimate symbol of warmth, safety, and happy endings. But when the cameras stopped rolling, there was a reality that contradicted the fairy tale. The audience worshipped her innocence, but that worship wasn't a gift. It was a prison cell. The tragedy of Meg Ryan wasn't a single accident. It was a systematic dismantling. First, she was punished for falling in love with the wrong man. Then, she was shamed for trying to grow up on screen. And finally, when she tried to fight the inevitable march of time, she was ridiculed for the very thing Hollywood demanded of her: eternal youth. The message was brutal and consistent. Stay the girl next door forever, or disappear. Most people would have vanished under that kind of global scrutiny. But the question today isn't why her career stumbled, or even what happened to her face. The real question is, how do you reclaim your own life when the entire world feels entitled to your past self? Welcome to the untold story of Meg Ryan. This isn't just about a fallen star. It is a forensic analysis of how Hollywood builds icons only to burn them down. Let's fade to black. To understand the fall, we have to understand the ascent. And the irony is, Meg Ryan never chased the crown she ended up wearing. Born Margaret Mary Emily Ann Hyra in Fairfield, Connecticut in 1961, she wasn't the theater kid desperate for applause. She was pragmatic, grounded. Her ambition wasn't to be on the cover of magazines, it was to write them. She enrolled at New York University to study journalism. Acting was merely a financial vehicle, a side hustle to pay tuition and rent in an unforgiving city. She took commercial work: Burger King, AIM toothpaste, airline ads. At this stage, there was no strategy. There was no Meg Ryan brand. There was just Margaret, working transactional jobs, blending in, observing the world with the detached curiosity of a reporter. But the camera saw something she didn't. In 1982, she landed the role of Betsy Stewart on the soap opera As the World Turns. It was a grind, daily work, repetitive dialogue, emotional continuity, yet something strange happened. Viewers didn't just follow the plot, they became possessive of Betsy. Her storyline unexpectedly spiked the ratings. Without trying, she was projecting a quality that money can't buy and acting classes can't teach: innate likability. By the time she moved to Los Angeles at 23, she had shortened her name to Meg Ryan using her grandmother's maiden name. It was shorter, punchier, lighter. A name that would eventually become an adjective for an entire genre of film. But in 1984, she was just another blonde actress in a city full of them, unaware that the machinery of Hollywood was already beginning to tighten around her. 1986 changed the trajectory. Top Gun was a movie fueled by testosterone, fighter jets, and sweat. Meg Ryan's role as Carol Bradshaw, Goose's wife, was small on paper. She could have easily faded into the background. Instead, she became the emotional anchor of the film. When she appeared on screen, she softened the frame. She brought a domestic warmth that made the stakes of the film feel real. People stopped her on the street, not screaming like fans, but chatting like neighbors. They felt they knew her. Then came Inner Space in 1987. This is where the spark turned into a flame. Starring opposite Dennis Quaid, something chemical happened. Audiences weren't just watching a script. They were watching two people genuinely falling in love in real time. It was electric. It was messy. It was real. That authenticity became her calling card. But the explosion arrived in 1989. When Harry Met Sally didn't just succeed, it rewrote the rules of engagement. Before this, romantic leads were often passive or purely glamorous. Ryan played Sally Albright as neurotic, high maintenance, and brilliantly specific. And then, the scene, the deli, Katz's delicatessen. What could have been crude became legendary. Why? Because of control. Meg Ryan wasn't performing for shock value. She was committing to a comedic truth. The film grossed over $92 million, a massive number for the time, and secured her a Golden Globe nomination. but more importantly, it solidified the mold. Meg Ryan was now the gold standard. She was the woman men wanted to marry and women wanted to be best friends with. The trap was set. Throughout the 1,990 seconds, Meg Ryan's career operated with mechanical efficiency. She was bankable in a way that is almost extinct in modern cinema. Films like Sleepless in Seattle didn't just open. They became global events, grossing over $227 million. You've Got Mail followed, raking in $250 million. By the end of the decade, she was commanding checks of $15 million per film. She was one of the highest-paid actresses on the planet, but this wealth came with a strict, unspoken contract. The audience paid for a specific version of Meg Ryan. The cute, slightly flustered, morally pure, and eternally optimistic woman who always gets the guy. Her partnership with Tom Hanks was mythologized. They were the modern Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. But notice the difference in their trajectories. Hanks was allowed to play a lawyer with AIDS, a slow-witted Southerner, a soldier, a castaway. He was allowed to stretch. Ryan was celebrated, yes, but she was also contained. She tried to push back. In 1994, she starred in When a Man Loves a Woman, playing an alcoholic mother. It was raw, unglamorous, and featured scenes of harrowing relapse. Critics praised her bravery. But the general public, they were uneasy. They watched the movie, but they didn't embrace it with the same fervor. They wanted the fantasy. They wanted the comfort food, not the harsh reality. Behind the scenes, the pressure to maintain this America's sweetheart avatar was suffocating. Interviews were minefields where she had to perform Meg Ryan, the character, even when Margaret Hyra was exhausted, struggling with the demands of motherhood, and navigating a high-profile marriage to Dennis Quaid. The cracks were invisible to the naked eye, but structural integrity was failing. The symbol was about to shatter. The year was 2000. The location, Ecuador. The film, Proof of Life. This was a physically demanding shoot, high up in the Andes, far removed from the protective bubble of Hollywood. It was here that Meg Ryan, whose marriage to Quaid had been quietly deteriorating for years, began a brief, intense affair with her co-star, Russell Crowe. When the news broke, it didn't just make headlines, it caused a moral panic. You have to remember the context. If this were a male action star, it would have been a footnote. A bad boy phase. But this was Meg Ryan. This was the woman who embodied family values and monogamous destiny. The backlash was instantaneous and misogynistic. Dennis Quaid filed for divorce, and the public narrative cast him as the wronged hero and Ryan as the villainous Scarlet Woman. It didn't matter that Quaid had his own history. It didn't matter that Ryan later admitted the marriage was broken long before Crowe arrived. The archetype had been violated. As Carrie Fisher famously told her, when you betray your archetype, you can't. Hollywood, which had bent over backward to accommodate her whims for a decade, suddenly went cold. The script stopped being automatic. The love affair with the audience turned into a judgment trial. She had become complicated, and the rom-com industry does not do complicated. Cornered and frustrated, Meg Ryan made a decision that was arguably the bravest of her career or, depending on who you ask, the most reckless. In 2003, she starred in The Cut, an erotic thriller directed by Jane Campion. This wasn't just a departure, it was a demolition. She appeared nude. She performed graphic sex scenes. The character was messy, dark, and sexually agentic. She was screaming to be seen as an artist, not a mascot. The response was brutal. The film bombed, grossing only $23 million. Critics were divided, but audiences were horrified. They didn't see reinvention. They saw a betrayal of their memories. And then came the interview that sealed her fate. On the BBC's Parkinson Show, faced with questions that felt intrusive and judgmental about her nudity and her choices, Ryan shut down. She gave one-word answers. She refused to play the game. The media branded her difficult, rude, and ungrateful. In reality, we were watching a woman exhausted by years of projecting a warmth she no longer felt. But in the PR game, likability is currency. And Meg Ryan had just declared bankruptcy. As the roles dwindled, another narrative began to take over, one far more personal and invasive. The public began to notice changes. While Ryan has never publicly confirmed specific procedures, observers noted that her face, the most famous face in American emotional history, was shifting. The cheeks were fuller, the eyes different. Now we need to pause and look at the hypocrisy here. Hollywood tells women that they become invisible after 40. It demands they stay young, but if they try to stay young through intervention, they are mocked for ruining themselves. It is a trap with no exit. Look at her male peers. Tom Hanks aged. He gained weight, his hair grayed, his face lined, and the world called him distinguished. He was allowed to carry his history on his face. Meg Ryan was not afforded that luxury. When she appeared at the 2016 Tony Awards, the internet didn't discuss her work. They dissected her appearance with surgical cruelty. The tragedy isn't that she might have sought surgery. The tragedy is that she felt she had to. She was trying to freeze the very thing that made her valuable, her girl-next-door youth, because she knew that without it, the industry had no place for her. By the mid-2000s, the writing was on the wall. The calls stopped coming. The A-list status evaporated. But rather than fighting a losing battle in Los Angeles, Meg Ryan chose a different path. She chose to disappear. She moved to New York full-time. She stepped out of the paparazzi's lens. This wasn't just professional, it was personal preservation. She focused on motherhood. In 2006, she adopted her daughter, Daisy True, from China. This decision grounded her. It gave her a purpose that box office receipts couldn't touch. There were also private battles the public knew nothing about. Ryan suffered from arthritis in her hips, a chronic pain that made long days on set physically agonizing. While the tabloids speculated about why she wasn't working, she was simply trying to walk without pain. She worked sporadically, small indie films, guest spots on Curb Your Enthusiasm, but the ambition had shifted. She was no longer chasing the ghost of Sally Albright. She was learning to live as Margaret Hyra again. For years, the question lingered, where is Meg Ryan? The answer turned out to be, she was in the director's chair. Thanks for watching. In We Have Dues, he said. In 2015, she directed Ithaca. It wasn't a blockbuster. It didn't restore her to the top of the A-list, but it was hers. It was a declaration of agency. She was no longer the object to be looked at. She was the one controlling the gaze. And then, in 2023, she returned to the screen in What Happens Later. A rom-com, yes, but not like the ones before. She played a woman her own age. She didn't try to hide the years. She wore them. In interviews, the defensiveness was gone. She spoke openly about ageism, about the ridiculousness of Hollywood standards, and about her life in Montecito, a life filled with friends, design, and peace. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking to be America's sweetheart again. She was simply existing. Looking back, it is tempting to see Meg Ryan's story as a tragedy, a cautionary tale about plastic surgery and bad PR. But that is the easy reading. The truth is, Meg Ryan didn't fall because she failed. She fell because she was human in an industry that rewards consistency over complexity. She fell because she dared to age, dared to make mistakes, and dared to change her face in a world that wanted it frozen in amber. Her journey mirrors the uncomfortable truth about how we consume celebrity. We love them until they become real. And when they become real, we discard them. Meg Ryan survived the machine. She is still here, creating on her own terms. But her story leaves us with an uncomfortable question. If the next Meg Ryan appeared today, talented, bright, and universally adored, would we treat her any differently? Or are we still just waiting for the moment she stops being a fantasy and starts being a person so we can tear her down all over again? I want to hear from you. Do you think the public turned on Meg Ryan because of the surgery? Or was the surgery just a symptom of the pressure we put on her? Let's argue it out in the comments below. I'm your name, and I'll see you in the next one.